Hello and welcome to episode 548 of the official EstablishTheRun.com podcast. My name is Adam Levitan, as always joined by Evan Silva. And with the draft, the NFL draft, just 1 week away, we have a very, very special guest. This is a young man who's been covering the NFL seemingly forever. Longtime radio voice, longtime draft analyst. You can see him on NFL Network. You can read him on NFL.com. It is, of course, the one and only Lance Zierlein of NFL.com and NFL media. Lance, thanks for doing the show. How's it going?
Yeah, it's going good, guys. What's going on? You establishing the run?
Yes. My location on Twitter is officially between the tackles, so that's how you know that I'm establishing the run.
We were also the highest site on in the industry on Dameon Pierce last year. Well, some of us were. But yeah, we're definitely establishing the run out here in these streets.
Yeah, well, you got to get physical, man. You got to have a physical runner. You can't be a slasher. At some point, you got to drop the pads and finish.
Oh right. My God, Evan is just throwing me under the bus after
I was. It's not you. It's Leone.
No. I thought Dameon Pierce in the 5th round was too high. I thought it was too high. Anyways, on today's show, this is a forward-thinking show. On today's show, we're going to talk all things NFL draft with Lance, the rumors, the prospects, connections to team, and of course, the Texans hold the key to the draft, I think, at number 2 overall. We'll cover them in detail as they are, in fact, Lance's hometown team. All right, Lance. It seems like a foregone conclusion at this point. I don't know if you look at the betting markets at all, but we're out to like minus 1,100, minus 1,400 on Bryce Young to be number 1 pick overall to the Panthers. Is that what you are hearing the Panthers will do as well, or is there still room there for someone else to sneak in? Or maybe is there room for the Panthers to do something crazy, or do you think this is just all Bryce Young all the time at number 1 overall?
Well, I think the only way anyone makes a trade with them is to get Bryce Young. So I if you want to say Bryce Young to the Panthers, okay, that's a little more specific. But if you want to say Bryce Young 1, yeah, I think it's going to be Bryce Young 1. I mean, I think the Texans would love to have Bryce Young, and if he's not going to be there, then they've got a decision to make. And Carolina, I think, I don't believe that this is all smoke. I do believe that Carolina is preparing their fan base and everything to go get your whatever your negatives you want to say, go get them out, and then go find the positives and rally around this draft pick. So I think it's going to be Bryce Young. Yeah, I think they're locked in.
I got to ask you, if I was the Panthers and I actually wanted CJ Stroud, this is the playbook that I would run. I would go tell everyone that I wanted Bryce Young, and force the Texans or someone else to trade up. I'm curious, you're obviously involved in a lot of these rumors and draft stuff. Why would anyone tell the truth? And how do you, when people tell you stuff, how do you discern whether it's true or they're just trying to use you to increase their trade leverage?
Well, for me, I don't really, I mostly work with people I've done stuff with a lot in the past, people I consider to be friends with. So I've never really felt used on anything. And I mean, I've been able to tell when I have heard something that was suspicious, like, some of the Josh Allen to, if anyone says you should put that out there, that's for sure a sign that, okay, this is absolutely not true. So, and I don't, my credibility and my integrity, they're just not going to be for sale. So I don't help any agents with any of this stuff. They already know that with me, so they don't try that. But, I do think the point you make is a good one. If you like CJ Stroud and you have a good handle that Bryce Young is a guy the Texans want, then you would play this up. But then it's hard to, you have to be careful about overplaying your hand, because if you tell the Texans, okay, well, like the Texans I don't know that the Texans would make a trade. You couldn't ask for too much. And if you moved anywhere beyond number 2, you'd run the risk of not being able to get your guy. So really the only trick up your sleeve is making the Texans believe you want Bryce Young, which is possible, which maybe you could get for them to bite on Bryce Young. And if they don't, they surprise everyone, go CJ Stroud, and then the Texans run the card up for Bryce Young. I mean, to me, you literally just scream out Bryce Young and you're done. As soon as they say CJ Stroud, say Bryce Young, and then the draft goes faster. We don't have to wait. But yeah, I think Bryce Young is going to be the guy, because I think the rumors about the owner really liking Bryce Young, and I think that's a real thing. And Bryce Young, frankly, is safer. I mean, he's not safer from a size standpoint, but the tape is much safer.
Yeah.
As to like Lance's like credibility or usability like by NFL teams, like your dad was a longtime offensive line coach in the league, right? So you grew up around it, so you kind of get how the whole thing works, right?
Yeah, and I met Alonzo Highsmith, who was the assistant GM over there, or I can't remember his exact title with John what's his name, who came over from the Green Bay Packers from Kansas City over to the Browns.
Yeah,
General
Dorsey.
Manager, John Dorsey. Yeah, thanks. Golly. So John Dorsey. So Alonzo went over there from Green Bay. Then he went and worked with John Schneider in Seattle. Zoe is a guy I met in 97, I think, 98. So I've known him for years and learned a lot under him. Chris Ballard was a scout for the Bears here in the Houston area. Used to just listen to my radio show. I met him in 2004. So I've been friends with Chris for about 18 years. And, a lot of other guys I don't really want to mention, but some coaches, some other personnel guys who live in Houston, who still live in Houston, some who used to live in Houston. And then they've introduced me to other guys as well. So I'll talk to GMs, assistant GMs, personnel people, agents. Some agents are full of it and some agents are very honest. Yeah. And you can tell the difference really quickly. And I think from a credibility standpoint, I've got credibility. Now, there's a difference between coming with information and trying to connect the dots. And so my mock draft that got all the attention, where I had the Texans skipping on CJ Stroud and taking Tyree Wilson, I didn't have inside information. A lot of people just assume I did and maybe tried to tail me on that one, but it was just putting two and two together. I heard the rumors like everyone about S2 scores for CJ Stroud. What I didn't realize is the Texans don't subscribe to S2. They've got something else they use. But I took that. I took Bobby Slowick from San Francisco, who's a new offense coordinator, and tried to, run through scenarios of what he might want out of a quarterback, what his philosophy based on being over there with Kyle Shanahan might be. I worked with the idea that David Mulligetta from Athletes First had Deshaun Watson, and that didn't end so well for the Texans. And he has CJ Stroud, so maybe that would play a part with the Houston Texans. And as I'm piecing all this for my draft together, I'm like, man, my mock draft would be so much easier if I just put CJ Stroud at 2 and I can just start the dominoes fall easy. But I said, you know what? Drafts don't usually go like you think they're going to go. So let me go ahead and throw this wrinkle in here because I think there's a chance they might not take him. And once I did that, then I had to decide between who would fit DeMeco Ryans best, Will Anderson or Tyree Wilson. And I know how NFL teams think. I know they love length. I know they love coachable upside. There's a belief that Will Anderson, is who he's going to be coming out after having Nick Saban as a coach. So you think, okay, not a lot of growth for Will Anderson. He's going to be a good player, a safer floor. But would the Texans look for the more explosive player with the longer arms and more traits? And so I just decided, you know what? I'm going to do something that's going to piss everyone off because it looks way different. And I'm going to pass on CJ Stroud, and then I'm going to pass on Will Anderson, and I'm going to go Tyree Wilson. I just put that together through football knowledge of where guys come from who are decision makers, and then I let the chips fall where they may, and it really created a ripple effect for me to consider for the rest of the draft. And I realized how messy this draft could get if CJ Stroud doesn't go 2. And then wouldn't you know it, all of a sudden I had a GM call me and tell me, hey, I saw your mock. It's way closer to reality than people realize, even though you're getting crap for it. And then I had an agent call me. I guess it was earlier this week or no, it was late last week, who told me, you're definitely on the CJ Stroud thing. He said I would 100%, and then I got some more confirmation. So unless Nick is playing the game of make you believe we don't want CJ Stroud, make you believe it, and then he ends up taking CJ Stroud. Now I just don't know why you would do that though, unless like the only people trading up to 2 are probably coming for CJ Stroud. So I don't really see what the benefit would be unless you wanted to see what's out there. And you said, we like CJ Stroud, but we don't like him enough to pass up on a great trade deal. So I would tell people, for people who are just bailing on CJ Stroud at 2 because I've said things or whatever, hey, the Texans absolutely could be putting that out there. I didn't get that from anybody with the Texans, but I've seen Peter King has had something. I know Adam Schefter and some others. There's a chance that maybe, the Texans say, hey, let's let that ride, and let's see if anyone will come up and give us a lion's share, because we're willing to trade back, because we got an offense that we think can work with a wide variety of quarterbacks. But my guess is they try to figure out a way if they can trade. But if the owner comes in and says, sorry, guys, I want a quarterback, I don't want to deal with this anymore, let's get a quarterback, then that's what's going to happen.
I think that there is a ton of steam on Texans won't take a quarterback at 2 from a lot of different places. As you mentioned, I'm just not sure I buy it. How often are you picking in the top 2 of an NFL draft and have reasonable quarterbacks at the top?
But could
I guess
they use 12 to come up and get their quarterback, a few picks later?
And that's what I was going to say. The Texans are in a unique situation because they also have the 12 pick. And so they can pass on there at 2 and still come back and get a quarterback. Do you think that's the plan? Assuming they pass on quarterback at 2, what do you think the Texans?
So let me lay out some contingencies. In my mock draft, that's what I did, Evan. I said, man, you can't come out of here without a quarterback. So I moved up to 7 with the Raiders, and I took Will Levis at 7. And then it was just I was trying to figure out, okay, Will Levis versus Anthony Richardson. But I went with Levis because he had a year under Liam Cohen in 2021 as a play caller who has he worked with the Rams and that same kind of offense. And so, I just figured, okay, Levis is going to know some of the terminology, some of the passing concept. He's played in a pro passing style attack. So he'd be more ready if you needed to play him right now than Anthony Richardson. And so that's the only reason I went Levis over Richardson. I don't have knowledge that the Texans like him better. I just thought he's more of a fit in that scheme. And he has a little bit more of a background. The problem that I ran into there, Evan, is that I had somebody in the league, I was discussing that, and he said, I think you could be onto something here. He said, the problem is, why would you not just trade back from 2, keep your 12, add a draft pick, and then take a quarterback at 7? Why would you not let the Raiders come up? And I said, it's perfectly, I could see the Raiders going 7-2, and then the Texans taking a quarterback at 7.
Because the Raiders were trying to come up to 1, right? The Raiders
that was the rumor. That was the rumor. So, and so, the trade back scenario might be, and it looks like it is more, more in line. Now, one thing that you could also do is draft whoever you want second, and then draft your quarterback third, or draft your quarterback second and then draft either Anderson or Tyree Wilson. For example, if you wanted those guys defensively, you could trade from 12 up to 3. You have firepower in next year's draft. Like Arizona needs draft picks. So you could say, look, we'll give you our first next year and maybe, a fourth this year, and we want to move from 12 to 3, or maybe a third this year and move 12 to 3. So you could get really aggressive and try to get picks number 2 and 3, or even 2 and 5.
Yeah. You mentioned the owner situation. I think a lot of best laid plans can go amok if an owner steps in, right? We know what the team wants. We know what the team needs. We know what the scouts like, et cetera, et cetera. Owner stepping in and putting his foot down, which has been known to happen, is certainly possible. In your experience, how much are the owners involved in the NFL draft selection process?
Not that much. Not in the past, they haven't. The wild card now is, the rumors are the wife is much more involved, which I actually don't think is a bad thing. I think Cal McNair's wife is really sharp. And I think Cal sometimes has been stepped on by people around him who have taken advantage of him since his dad, who owned the team, Bob McNair, passed away. I think it's been people have just made power plays over there, and it's really hurt the team. They could become more, from what I understand, they are more involved now. Now, does that extend into getting their hands in place where Nick Caserio and first-year head coach D'Amico Ryans are kind of running things? I don't know if they would do that, but if, I've heard that the building split on CJ Stroud, so it's not like there's no CJ Stroud juice there. There absolutely is. I think the real question here is, logically, what Evan brings up makes sense. You can't just assume you're going to be terrible next year. You can win 6 games, and all of a sudden, I don't care how many first-round picks you have, if the team number 1 and team number 2 need quarterbacks, they're not trading their picks.
Yeah.
So you'd almost have to be a 2-win, 3-win, maybe 4-win team to have a shot at the two guys that everyone assumed, Drake May and Caleb Williams. But, also Quinn Ewers had a really good spring practice. Quinn Ewers is a guy with a lot of talent. Quarterbacks always pop up out of nowhere.
Sure.
So we're going to have other quarterbacks pop up. It always happens like that. No one saw Joe Burrow coming up like that. No one saw Kyler Murray being the first pick. Baker Mayfield was not considered first pick material when he ended up being the first pick, not before the season at least. And I would argue that, Trevor Lawrence, we all knew about that was going to be a lock, but Anthony Richardson was not viewed that way coming into the season. And so, Will Levis was the guy. It's supposed to be Will Levis and Stroud and Bryce Young were the guys. So, but if you have the second pick and you don't fire there, man,
yeah,
you better have a plan at some point to move up or to go trade for a guy like Trey Lance off another roster or Mac Jones off another roster. And even then, you're getting someone else's discards, and you're going to have to hope that you can do more with them than the other team did.
Okay, let's move off the Houston stuff for a second here. I want to get your take on Bijan Robinson. It feels to me like the NFL has had a seismic shift. And, we mockingly named the site Establish the Run because obviously we think that is a less efficient way to play football, to really run the ball a ton. From a team building perspective, I think the NFL has realized due to salary cap constraints and how replaceable running backs are, that they are not very valuable. We saw really good prospects like Jonathan Taylor and Breece Hall go in round 2. What do you think about how the NFL views the NFL views the running back position now, and where do you think Bijan ends up going in this draft?
Well, Bijan's going to go in the first. I think he goes inside the first 20 picks is the heat that I'm getting from people who – there's some people who believe he could go inside the first, 13, 14 picks. And that obviously he wouldn't go to the Jets. I don't believe the Texans would draft him. You could consider him with the Titans at 11.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is, and I understand the analytical argument, and it's certainly backed by historical data. I mean, there's no doubt about that. I recognize that. And as a fan of outside zone scheme teams, you can find running backs if they know how to play. And if they are one-cut guys who are courageous and have good vision and some bursts, you can be a one-cut back. I think the big difference, though, to me, and I've had this discussion with some analytics directors who they frankly think my viewpoint here is solid. Teams who are really good, teams who have 2 draft picks in the first round, these are teams that may benefit from having a running back drafted in the first, because you get not only the 5th year, but you get dibs on the franchise tag, which is not a penal tag in the NFL. So would you rather have Bijan for 4 years and then you're having to decide on a second contract where he still is in his prime? And we've seen second contracts have been big problems for running backs. Or would you rather have Bijan Robinson for a minimum of 6 years, maybe even as many as 7 years, and then let him walk after that? I kind of like the idea of taking, if the running back is, special, and I think Bijan has a chance to be special, I kind of like the idea of taking a back in the first round and realizing I can get 7 years out of this running back. I mean, it's possible that I could do a 7-year deal basically with first contract, 5th year option, 2 franchise tags. And now I've got a guy all the way up until age 28 or 29, and then I can let him walk after that. And I have not put myself on the line for a big, long second contract. It's just been a series of 1-year deals at 5, 6, and 7. So I'd be interested to see if the NFL starts to change their opinion on only certain types of backs. It has to be 3-down backs who score touchdowns, who catch the ball.
Catch passes.
Like very rare. I thought that back. I thought that back was also Travis Etienne. I thought Etienne had that kind of. He got hurt, but I thought Travis Etienne had that same thing, and I really liked him as a pass catcher. But like a Jahmyr Gibbs, I wouldn't waste a 5th year option on Jahmyr Gibbs. He's going to be more of just a pass catching guy like Alvin Kamara was. So let's see what he looks like as a 2nd round pick, and let's use him in an Alvin Kamara role, and let's make a decision. And if we have to move on from him, we move on from him. So
two contextual aspects that I think are working in the favor of Bijan Robinson. I don't know where you put him in your latest mock. I had him 8 to the Falcons in mine. Is that this draft is especially weak at the skill positions. The wide receivers aren't very strong. Obviously, the tight ends are pretty good, but there's a big drop off after Bijan. at running back. And I think the quarterbacks are suspect after Bryce Young, who's 5'10". And also that teams can convince themselves that Bijan is an all-purpose playmaker, not just a running back, and that he could be just a difference maker for them on offense, sort of like Christian McCaffrey maybe.
Yeah.
So I think those are two aspects that are going to help him like when the actual draft starts.
For sure.
Well, I'll go a step further. I'll say it's a bad draft. I mean, in general, you don't have a true – I don't believe you have a true top 10 offensive tackle. You don't have – you have two quarterbacks who are at the top. The other two are big, high ceiling, low floor guys. So that's a consideration. I think one of those quarterbacks is going to slide absolutely into the teens and maybe even into the 20s. As you mentioned, it's not a great wide receiver year. I don't think there's a true wide receiver one that's really you plug into a wide receiver one spot on an NFL team. I think they're complementary wide receivers. And then you look at defensive tackle. You have Jalen Carter that has his own character issues that you question. A 280-pound defensive tackle in Kalijah Cansey. So now, it's not a great offensive tackle draft. It's not a good running back draft. We may not see a linebacker go in the first round. Brian Branch is the only quote-unquote safety that could go in the first, and he's more of a nickel. I mean, there's just a lot of positions that don't have a stacking of players that figure to go early. I think cornerback is going to get drafted. I think, obviously tight ends could see as many as 3 in the first round. So to that point, Evan, well, man, this is a good football player who's clearly the number one running back, and it's not close. Yeah. Would you rather have a really good player, or would you rather take a chance on – do you just want to follow the analytical pattern of, well, there's not as much value at running back? I just want good football players. And for some teams, you need to build out rosters. I totally get it. But if the Eagles took them at 10 – I mean, all they're basically doing is saying we're putting another bullet in the chamber is what we're doing. If the Tennessee Titans did it, they're basically saying we love what Derrick Henry did, so we want to go get another guy, and we're going to move Derrick Henry and get a draft pick for him, and we're going to continue to try to play. I don't think they would draft running back in the first personally, but I do think there's some interesting targets and spots, and you just mentioned Atlanta. Hey, that division sucks. Why can't Atlanta be the top dog in the NFC South, and having a running back make things easier on Desmond Ridder. All of a sudden, if you have a good running game, Desmond Ritter's job gets way easier, and you're on a third-round rookie contract. That is way easier to build around financially with free agents as well. So interesting. I think he's really hard to project where he goes. You can easily go all the way to Buffalo or Minnesota if they want to get rid of Dalvin Cook, or Buffalo trading up to Minnesota like I did. Or you could legitimately make a point at 8 or 10 to say, hey, man, this guy's one of the top 4 players in the draft. Why don't we just take a good football player?
Yeah, I think the counter argument would be, listen, Tyler Algier and the Falcons ran the ball incredibly well last year, and that was with a 6th-round rookie or whatever Algier was, and you can get guys like that late famously. Anyways, we're not here to belabor the running back point. I am curious, though, about players who maybe the NFL feels differently than the public does. I mean, I can't even mention Anthony Richardson's freaking name without people barking down my throat that this guy is trash. He's going to be horrible in the NFL. NFL clearly thinks differently. This guy is probably going to go in the top 10. And Will Levis, too. People hate Will Levis, Lance. I mean, you can't say much good things about Will Levis without people getting all up in arms also. What do you think about that dichotomy there between the NFL and the public, and any other players that come to mind that maybe the NFL thinks differently about than the public does?
Well, okay, let me just say this. I'm not sure if the NFL thinks that much differently about Will Levis than some of the general public, but except for the fact that I know how much the general public hates Will Levis. Like, he T-boned them and he has no insurance.
Yeah.
It's weird. I think Will Levis is a 2nd-round quarterback, but it's very strange to see the way people act. Like, look, I thought Josh Allen was kind of almost a 2nd-round quarterback as well. You can not want your team to draft somebody, but the way that people are going about the Will Levis thing, like, dude, this guy's got talent. He's got arm talent. He's got ability. I don't know if he's going to be a good NFL quarterback, but he's got the ingredients to be a good quarterback. So I'd slow your roll on all this hate. And let's face it, he doesn't have a good mixtape. Anthony Richardson's got a good mixtape. Everyone can use the same thing. We've all seen him. The long LSU run, the play against Tennessee where he's darting left and right in the pocket with the shot from behind, and then he makes the throw to the right. He's got the rollout against, I think it's Missouri or Vandy, where he throws a dime in the end zone for a touchdown. We've all seen the same plays. The problem is I've seen the rest of the tape, and it's not good. So for Anthony Richardson, he and Levis, to me, are in the same category. they both have the potential to be. They're much more physically talented than Stroud and Bryce Young, but their games are nowhere near those guys in terms of consistency. So, but yes, I think Richardson is really helped by the success of Jalen Hurts more than anybody. And then Will Levis, Will Levis is a guy who NFL teams say he played through 3 injuries this year. He played through them physically, tough, gutted his way through them. He had a bad offensive line. He didn't have good wide receivers, although I take some issue with that. I think he's got a pretty good wide receiver that went back to Kentucky that we'll hear about next year. And, Levis was much better in 21 under Liam Cohen, who, really ran a good pro-style offense that Levis will work under. So I think you're right, Adam. I think people are too hard on Will Levis. However, I don't know that anyone really views him as this Josh Allen. There were people who really legit bought into Josh Allen. Yeah. I don't think we're going to see that with Will Levis. Some other guys I think that the NFL is going to be higher on, Lucas Van Ness, and his tape isn't great, but his traits are off the charts. Darnell Washington
didn't start at Iowa. What was that all about?
But that's because basically there was a senior starting ahead of him, and it was one of these let's start the senior.
Okay.
He played plenty. I wouldn't get too much. That's a good talking point, but
yeah.
I don't know that Will Anderson has as much clearly the best defensive player love that everyone thinks. I've talked to a couple teams who have Tyree Wilson ahead of him, so I don't know that everyone sees him as a must-have top 3 or 4 player. That's not necessarily the case. There's a lot of people who like Devon Witherspoon way better than Christian Gonzalez.
Mm-hmm.
They just don't think Christian Gonzalez, for all his traits, is as tough as Devon Witherspoon. But corner, trying to project the market on that is really tough because teams have vastly different opinions on traits and playing style. So that can really be a tricky one. Nobody's excited about Michael Mayer, and yet he could easily be the first tight end off the board. And no one's excited about him, but they all think he's
Do they not watch tape? I mean,
well, no one they don't see juice, but I think he's a better blocker than some. I had one team tell me he's not that good a blocker. I'm like, he's a good blocker. What do you mean? Coming out, none of these guys are good blockers coming out. This guy's way ahead of the curve as a blocker coming out. And I think, if he's Kyle Rudolph, you're fine. That's fine. Could he be better than that? Yeah,
he's way better than that.
He could be better than that, but teams don't get super excited about him. Brian Branch, they love the player. It's just they don't love the speed and the testing, and I think Brian Branch is going to fall back further than where his tape was. His tape is way, way better than where I think he's going to get drafted. I don't know that Broderick Jones gets drafted as high. I'm a big Broderick Jones guy, but the teams I talk to, they seem to like Paris Johnson and Darnell Wright better than Broderick Jones. I think Broderick Jones is the best tackle, and I think Skoronski's a guard, just so so we're clear on that. I think Deonte Banks is going to get drafted ahead of Porter. I think teams like Porter, but they really fear that he's just a one-scheme press corner only. And so those kind of guys sometimes can get pushed down.
It seems to me that Joey Porter Jr. is going to go later than people expect.
I think he could. Same thing with Keely Ringo, and some of this has already been fleshed out. But every time I watch tape and then I see early mock drafts from different people around draft Twitter or media members, I'm like, this guy has not watched enough of him, or he hasn't watched him at all. It's like Brian Bresee could get drafted in the first, but it'll have to be because somebody really wants defensive tackle. I'm higher on Drew Sanders than the league is. I think the league is much lower on Drew Sanders. I think he could be a late first, maybe slide into the second. So, but I don't care. I'll fade the league. I don't care about that. It's not the first time I've faded the league. And Will McDonald, the league is really high on Will McDonald, but it's certain teams that are high on him. And Jahmyr Gibbs, certain teams are very high on Jahmyr Gibbs. So, but I'm trying to look at
what about Anton Harrison? I've heard that some teams are really into him, but I don't that he's going to go in the first round, but he doesn't seem to be considered super high. Anton Harrison.
So the grades on him
Oklahoma.
the grades on him go anywhere from late 1 to middle 3.
Okay.
So he's going to be a tough one. I'm going to stick with round 2. is my projection on him.
Oh, that's right. I read your draft profile, and you didn't seem to love him.
I think he's going to be an average starter. I actually
Okay.
like him. I gave him a 62,
Okay.
which is
Okay.
a good average NFL starter. But I see there's some holes in his game that I think could be a problem. I talked to a team the other day that just really didn't like him, but I think he's pretty solid. I think there's a chance, and I think there's a chance Anton Harrison could end up being a better tackle than Paris Johnson.
Jeremiah, we've noticed in his rankings, has Jordan Addison had him at number 9 overall at one point, like his number 9 overall player.
Right.
Jordan Addison. And then had Jaxon at 23. And everybody has, like, if you look at the odds right now, it's like plus 400 to get Jordan Addison to be the first wide receiver drafted. And Jaxon Smith-Njigba is like a super heavy favorite. What do you think about that?
Well, once again, I mean, because it's such a tricky draft, I mean, teams look at, so if you don't mind a 175-pound wide receiver playing outside, a lot of people see Jaxon Smith-Njigba as a slot only. A lot of teams do. So, it depends on, if you see him as a slot only, it kind of limits him a little bit. And then if you look at Jordan Addison, you see a smaller wide receiver, but he can play inside, outside. Now we got to work through two tricky situations. Addison's production came down, and he had a Heisman winner this year. But you can make a case for the fact that Kenny Pickett was just targeting him a ton last year. So, or in 2021. So you could get to that. You have Smith-Njigba, who had an incredible finish to one of the greatest 6-game finishes I've ever seen for a receiver ever in 2021. But then in 2022, pulls a hamstring. He doesn't make it back. There's questions about, did he just sit out and protect his draft stock? He ran, I think if he would have run a 4.56, which a lot of people thought he was going to, I would say that first wide receiver pick would be up in the air. But now that he ran well, he looked great at the combine. Like, I had to bump his grade. I was too low on him. I had to bump his grade because his short area testing was elite. Watching him run his routes, I could see where the separation would come. Like, once you see him in person, it can be different than watching on tape. And at the combine, I'm like, okay, I'm too low on him. So, and you can't be afraid to miss or to be wrong. Like, you just got to try to be accurate. And so I wanted to be accurate. And so I raised my grade on him. He's going to be a better receiver than the day that I watched him. I only watched him that first day. And, I just realized, okay, I was too hard on him that day. But he didn't play last year. Can he play slot? At the end of the day, he's like 200 pounds, and he has really strong hands, and he tested well. I just don't see how he's not going to be the first pick, the first wide receiver off the board. Zay Flowers, you can make a case for Zay, but Zay had some drop issues during the season, so you got to work around that. Jalen Hyatt, who's a great vertical threat, he's a one-way guy. He's just a vertical guy, and unless teams just say, this is what we really need, could he surprise? Sure, he could, but I don't see him surprising in the top 20. So are those numbers too high? Maybe. I think Smith-Njigba, I'm not Smith-Njigba, but Addison, I wouldn't have him that high, where DJ has him. And yet when I talked to an NFL team the other day, they said they think it goes Smith-Njigba, Addison 2, and then Zay Flowers 3. And they think those are the only 3 wide receivers getting in the first. So I put Addison as a first-round projection, even though I have more of a early second-round pick on him. Mm-hmm. And DJ talks to a lot of guys around the league. So when you're seeing DJ's top 50, just keep in mind that it's going to be DJ's opinion, but he also shades it with a little bit of what he's hearing from league personnel, because DJ wants to be accurate and be right. Sure. And so when you see a guy that DJ has higher than everyone else, you should pay attention.
Sure.
Same thing with when they're much lower than everyone else.
No doubt. It feels to me like the NFL, and maybe it's just a function of this class, but they seem to be valuing slot receivers more than in the past. Like 5 years ago, I feel like no one would take a strict slot receiver in the top 20 picks of the NFL draft. Feels like with the way the NFL has changed, they're more open to that now. Do you agree that slot is gaining more importance inside NFL circles?
Well, I think Cooper Kupp had a huge change, really changed that. He works from the slot, and I remember thinking, I don't know if he's fast enough. Can he separate? Well, forget about it. He's a great route runner, He has great hands. He has great instincts with the ball in his hands or inside the route. He has great instincts. He plays at unbelievable speed. And what we found is that a team won a Super Bowl because they could literally ride a slot receiver, and with those choice routes that he runs, it became too hard for teams to guard. And what we're seeing now with the slot is you can mismatch people from the slot. And so, big wide receivers play from the slot, smaller wide receivers, speed wide receivers, possession receivers. I think, kind of like if you guys are basketball fans, so we went away from saying 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 from a positional standpoint, and it got to be wing players. You're a wing player, you're a combo guard, you're a stretch 4. All of the definitions started to change. And I think with wide receiver, it used to be, okay, small, fast guy in the slot, so we're going to get small, fast guy as a nickel. It's different now. Nickels can be 200-pound run thumpers, and you're going to play more zone, but you want to be able to sit in your nickel as a base and be able to stop the run. You see faster wide receivers outside who aren't as big, like Tyreek Hill, but he can blaze. Like, he can really run. So what's the difference, especially if he can win throws down the field, which he can uniquely so for a player his height. Okay, you got a big guy who, possession. Well, Keenan Allen's changed a lot of that. That guy's a good route runner, but he's going to win contested catches as well. So how about having a possession guy that's closer to the quarterback who can win?
Michael Thomas made a lot of his money there,
100% Michael Thomas.
Yeah.
So now I think everyone's open to the fact that let's not get bogged down with this guy fits in this silo, this guy fits in this silo. Tank Dell is 163 pounds. He played in the 150s, University of Houston. Unguardable.
Yeah.
Unguardable. And NFL teams lately, I got a little pushback when a lot of the GMs hadn't really watched him. When we were at Senior Bowl watching him, like, he's so small and blah, blah, blah. And then once they watch him on tape, it's like, he can't be guarded, and he's not hit hard a lot.
Though. He's so small.
So now they're trying to figure out, like, Calvin Austin got hurt for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Yeah. And so you think, well, Calvin Austin
hasn't been great.
Yeah. And so small receivers have had a lot of trouble in the slot. However, you start pointing to Devontae Smith, like, man, this guy's rail thin at 170 some odd pounds, and he's tough. And Tank Dell never missed a game at University of Houston. He plays really fast. His separation and ball skills are phenomenal. And he's an example of, like, this whole draft is full of outliers. 150-pound wide receiver, a sub 200-pound 5'10" quarterback, because I don't care how much water he had. Bryce Young's under 200 pounds when he plays. You've got, Addison is 175. Josh Downs, who I love, is 171. Kalijah Kancey is like 280 to 285 at defensive tackle. It's a draft full of outliers. I've never.
Sounds like a shitty draft.
Yeah, Deuce Vaughn is 177 pounds or whatever, and this guy's one of the toughest running backs in the draft. It's just.
I like that we're getting a little deeper here, but let me bring it back to an inflection point, because one of the draft's inflection points is Jalen Carter. Like, and I heard you talk with Dane and I came the other guy on the Athletic podcast about Jalen Carter. You guys had a pretty in-depth. Where's this guy going to go? Because I feel like he could go number 5 to Seattle. I think that's where you guys slotted him, because you guys were doing a mock. But I could also see him going as late as number 10 to the Eagles. And really to almost any team in that range. What do you think? Do you think he could slip a bit, or what do you think is going to happen?
Yeah, you got to have some balls to take him, and you got to have a plan. So here's one thing that would really concern me. Number one, Todd McShay had the info right. He got killed, but he was right. But I don't think there was any benefit to going with it as early as Todd went, because, it makes you look bad if you're Todd McShay. But he was accurate, though. There were some issues behind the scenes. Now, when Todd said all that stuff, it was before the street racing had happened. But that also should give you a heads up on this is a continuing issue. After his last game of the regular season into the playoffs, Jalen Carter was out of shape for the Ohio State game. And he said, man, I was gassed. And that was, 5 weeks off, and he was out of shape. Then he gets to his pro day, and he's out of shape again, and he's heavier than he played at, and he can't finish the drills. These are 2 different breaks that he had where he's gotten out of shape. And this is the biggest moment of his life. And you can definitely say, okay, well, he's dealing with a lot of stressful situations from going from the national championship to his pro day. We know he didn't get a chance to work out at the combine. It's stressful. And could he have been stress eating or not working out or depressed or whatever? Yeah, absolutely. That's possible. But how do you explain him being completely gassed and out of shape when they played Ohio State? So I think my concern would be, now we've seen a pattern of immaturity there. Do we really want to take this chance? And I always harken back to Isaiah Wilson, who was drafted by the Tennessee Titans, and that dude was out of the league before you knew it. Like, just didn't care enough about football and just super immature. And that was a first-round pick that was literally burned by the Titans. Like, he was burned after a year. It was done. And so that brings me to the Philadelphia Eagles. And you mentioned him. You mentioned the Eagles. They got Jordan Davis. And the word from NFL teams is Jordan Davis is like a mentor to Jalen Carter. So if there's one team that would be down with drafting Jalen Carter that thinks that not only can they get the great player, but they have a mentor and a plan for him, it'd be the Eagles. Do they want to wait until 10? I don't think so. I think the Eagles could move up to 8 ahead of Chicago. I think they could move up to 7, especially if 1 or 2 quarterbacks start sliding.
Now we're cooking.
Yeah. And I think that, to me, if I'm the Eagles and I got a chance to get Jalen Carter with his talent, and I think that I've got a plan in place to help with a mentor, man, I'm talking about, I'm trying to win a Super Bowl. I'm right there on the cusp. I'm trying to do something that helps me win a Super Bowl. And Jalen Carter you can afford to swing with Jalen Carter because you got a strong locker room and you got Nakobe Dean and Jordan Davis in there with you. Yeah. And they're former Georgia players.
And of course, the Eagles have a long history of drafting offensive and defensive line and putting a big priority on that for sure. Exactly. They've lost a ton of defensive pieces this offseason as well, have the Eagles. I want to get to some listener questions before we run out of time here. Appreciate everyone who sent in questions. From Aging Fantasy Dad, he says, besides himself, who in the public space does Lance rate as a top evaluator of talent? And separately, who does he rate highly for analyzing draft outcomes, connecting the dots? Who are you following, Lance, when it comes to draft and draft evaluation?
Well, I think Dane Brugler does a fantastic job. The beast that he puts out, he and I do a podcast together for The Athletic, but I remember when he was with NFL Draft Scout, Dane's been really good for a long time. And I think Dane scouts it like an NFL scout. He's had NFL teams reach out to him in the past about potentially working for them, and he's turned them down. I think Dane is a guy that, we don't always agree with on every player, but we see him fairly similarly, and I think our processes are similar, and I got a lot of respect for Dane. I think Daniel Jeremiah works his tail off. Daniel works hard. Daniel and I go through players throughout the year. We'll talk about this guy. I'll say, hey, you need to see this guy or this guy. We'll go through our grades together and see how we see players similarly or different. Daniel puts a lot of time in. I think since Mayock left and Daniel took over the Mayock position, he's really put the pedal to the metal and has really increased the amount of players he looks at as well. So I think DJ does a great job. I don't really look at too many. And the reason I do that is I don't want any bias. Yeah. Like, a lot of people are already putting stuff out there. I don't even like looking at mocks that much or top lists because it's easy to get a bias. I don't like having a filter, negative or positive, about a player. So I'll wait to even write them up until I have enough tape to start. Like, I usually don't get started until November. Mm-hmm. So I have a big enough body of work. And then the quarterbacks I won't even watch until December because I want to see all their throws. And I try to avoid it. I know Matt Miller is a hustler. He really hustles. Jordan Reed, I think, does a really good job. I've seen Jordan since he's been coming up. I think he's working really hard. I'm probably leaving people out, but those are some guys that I'm just off the top of my head thinking of. But I try to avoid. I don't want to be. One of the hard things is if you keep hearing this name over and over, you don't want to start changing grades because you're scouting with your ears. Like, yep. You want to trust your first instincts. And I've made that mistake before where I heard everyone be real negative on a guy that I maybe like Darius Leonard. I like Darius Leonard like a first rounder. And then people kind of didn't see it that way. And I'm like, yeah, maybe I need to back off of it. Well, that was stupid. I should have just trusted my eyes. And so I try to avoid those situations, to be honest. Now, as far as connecting the dots, you mean information source providers?
Yeah, or whose mock you like to look at, stuff like that.
Well, I always think Pete Schrager's mock is very interesting. Schrager came out with a really wild mock today because Pete's got some good sources. Like, we know Ian Rappaport is connected. Adam Schefter's connected. They don't do mock drafts. Yeah. Schrager's got connections for different teams. And so I pay attention to what he says. When Schrager has something, I I tend to pay attention to what he says.
Yeah.
He's a pretty good one. But I do want to say this. So I'm in the Huddle Report mock draft challenge and top 100 challenge. And this is on God. This is true. The people who win that, they're not the big name guys. Like, I'm one of the best big name guys on the board over the years. But I know Evan has done really well in the past. And, Rick Gosselin used to get if Rick Gosselin said it, it was the truth. Bob McGinn, who's got his own, not Substack, but he's like something like that. Bob McGinn has something like that.
Blog. It's called Go Long now.
Go Long. Dude,
Yeah.
Bob, you want to look up Bob McGinn stuff. And if Rick Gosselin ever had anything, it was the truth.
Yeah.
He was so well connected. Nolan Rocky used to be really well connected, but the guys on the draft stuff on Huddle Report, I mean, there's just hustlers and draftniks out there who are doing it, who are winning those contests. So
Sure.
I would just tell you that, scout a little bit with your ears, take in what this guy says and that guy says, do your own work, and then try to study the teams and how the teams behave, because that's what you really need to know. One thing I would caution people against: be careful about looking at odds and deciding that the mock draft is going to be, because the mock drafts are shifted by, the odds at casinos right now, I've noticed, are heavily influenced by just mock drafts. They're just guessing.
You can bet $50 and move a line by 20, 50,
everything's
75
circled
cents right
anyway.
now.
Like,
this is I would totally agree that the market is not very efficient. It's just not very liquid. You mentioned Schefter and Rap Sheet. There's been some crazy things at the top of the draft late. Like, no one had Travon Walker going number 1 until very shortly before the draft.
When I had it 3 weeks before. But I only said it on my radio show. And you know where I got it from? I got it from an agent. And an agent told me, and it's not an agent for Travon Walker. This agent heard it, and it's an agent I trust. And then he basically said it's going to be this guy. But he didn't tell me it was locked in stone. He just said Trent Baalke's going to see him like Aldon Smith. And I'm like, oh, that makes sense. And so the more I thought about it and the traits and all that, and you start to realize, man, that's kind of like when I started distancing myself from CJ Stroud with the second pick and started going Bryce Young with the first. You start realizing, man, if you really start thinking about this and you put pieces together, Travon Walker would make a lot of sense because he tested great at the combine. He has rare physical traits. He comes from a winning program. And yes, Trent Baalke came over from San Francisco where they had Aldon Smith. So you could see that. And so I started mentioning on the radio show, started putting it out there on some different places. But you're right. He didn't go until the odds didn't change on him until very late.
Exactly. And I guess my point is that, like, Schefter and Rap Sheet and all these guys, we love them. They're so valuable to us as fantasy players, but they get misinformation a lot. And, like, I know I already asked this kind of, but we got a question from Chris. He said, how often do teams actually intentionally release fake leaks, create smoke screens? I know you don't know for sure, but how often do you think these guys
It's not as much as people think. I see people say this all the time.
People think everything's a freaking smoke screen.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's lion season. It's not lion season, lying season.
Right.
It's more smoke. A lot of times I follow up on that stuff and it ends up not being smoke, or you watch after the draft and it's not smoke. Okay. So I still am puzzled how it gets out. Like, because you would say, why would anyone want that information out? And I don't know how it gets out, because sometimes it ends up being true. But yes, there are some things that will get leaked out there, but it's usually things like the Texans saying, D'Amico Ryans came out and said, we like 2 quarterbacks a lot at the top of the draft. I don't know if that's true or not. Like, I know they like Bryce Young, but I don't know for sure if that's true or not. I don't, and that's the way that you can leak it yourself, some misinformation or some smoke. But it may be he was telling the truth, and we all may be shocked when the market rolls back around and CJ Stroud's the second pick. And D'Amico Ryans can say, I told you, and everyone in Houston can tell me to fuck off, because they're already mad at me for not giving them CJ Stroud and for giving them Will Levis. Me trading up from 12 to 7 to take Will Levis almost got me kicked out of Houston. The fans were so pissed off about that.
Yeah, they're angry for sure. We got a question from M Walk. He said, Dylan Jeremiah wrote about how the Patriots don't think like most teams in terms of positional value. Would love to hear if Lance views any other teams as process outliers in a similar way. We've seen the Patriots do some crazy things in the draft that nobody saw coming whatsoever. We've seen the Raiders do crazy things in the draft that nobody could predict. Are there any other teams out there you can think of Lance, that do weird things or
Well,
outside of the norm.
But you mentioned two teams that have had some high failure rates too.
Yep.
Like Bill Belichick's success rate has not been great over the last several years. Raiders were so heavy on traits that they, sometimes overlook tape in the component enough. Most of the outliers are going to be more like at certain positions. So one of the things that you'll always notice that New England always covets bigger, stronger ends with length. They don't have to be fast guys with electric speed.
That's the old Bill Parcells.
It is the old Bill Parcells. And same thing with the 250-pound, Juwan Bentleys and a Landon Roberts. Like, they still haven't gotten the memo about 230-pound linebackers that can run and that speed's important. They're still looking for hammers. So there are certain positions they are like that. Obviously, Green Bay has they don't value wide receiver in the first, but we'll see if that changes now that they don't have a Hall of Fame quarterback that we know of pulling the trigger. A lot of times the West Coast teams covet certain types of running backs, and so you have to know, and certain types of offensive linemen. So that's really more their outlier, is that they're willing to, and that's kind of changed a little bit. It used to be you could take a 295-pound, 300-pound guard, undrafted or sixth round, and you could win with those guys. Mm-hmm. Somewhere along the line, they started realizing, let's go bigger so that we can win around the goal line also. And these big guys can move a little better. So let's change some of our size constraints on some of these guards. So the Indianapolis Colts and Seattle. So the Colts have Ballard, who was influenced by John Dorsey, who was influenced by the Packer way. John Schneider came from the Packer way also. Mm-hmm. They are really big into traits. So length, certain types of bend. But from an outlier standpoint, Ballard hasn't drafted a wide receiver in the first round or a cornerback. And I think he believes that you can find, he comes from the school of, you can find cornerbacks in the second round or third round. Yeah. You can find wide receivers outside of the first round if you need to. So, but as far as the Patriot outlier, no, nobody's is.
Yeah.
Ever since Al Davis died, and it's the Patriots are the reigning champs of outlier draft.
Yeah.
It's hard to predict them.
I wanted to ask about the second running back off the board market as we kind of wrap up here. I think the assumption is it's going to be Jahmyr Gibbs. It sounds like you like Jahmyr Gibbs in the right scheme with the right setup, but there's a lot of people that really like Zach Charbonnet. How do you think the NFL views Gibbs versus Charbonnet? Who do you think will go first there?
I think Gibbs goes first. He's more dynamic. Charbonnet kind of he doesn't stop his feet and start his feet well. So you have to have him in an offense a lot like you would run for Derrick Henry, where it needs to be like an outside zone where he gets to really get the legs going and build up his speed and keep his feet moving. You don't want him off a lot of, offset shotgun stuff as well. So for me, Zach Charbonnet has to be in a certain type of offense. So that kind of starts to limit the amount of teams who could take him. When you look at Jahmyr Gibbs, because I comped him to Alvin Kamara because of how he plays, everybody could use that. Everybody can use a mismatch running back that can leave the backfield and force a linebacker or a safety on him. Anybody would value that. So I think Jahmyr Gibbs, because he's more dynamic, is going to be the second guy off the board. And I really don't know who the third back. I'm not sure. I think Charbonnet is going to be a third back off the board. I'm going to check with teams to get slotting on running backs. So hopefully I'll know today or tomorrow. But right now, those are clearly the 1 and the 2. And then I'm really interested to see where Roschon Johnson, Tank Bigsby, some of these other guys fit in as well.
Last question from the listeners I have is from Chris. He says, what's something Lance is most confident will happen in the draft? Anything you're super confident that maybe people aren't talking about that's going to happen in the draft?
The people aren't talking about. I would say
that all the commenters on their mock drafts and the internet are going to be really wrong when all their certainty implodes.
See, for me, I think I'll give one for me while you think, Lance. For me, I think that Will Levis is going to go in the top 6 picks, like almost for sure. And yeah, that's just what I think.
Well, I would say two things. I think one quarterback falls. I feel pretty confident about that. I think 3 tight ends going to first. where I know, and that's the underdog, by the way, on the market, but I think 3 tight ends end up going first. And then I think another thing will be that I feel confident in is that there is going to I feel confident that Philadelphia is going to make a big splash. You don't get that, and Buffalo too. I don't think you get that close. I don't think you get that close and not say we need to take our shot right here. And I think both of those teams, Buffalo could aggressively move up for somebody. I think Philadelphia could make an aggressive move. We talked about the Jalen Carter. That's just one example of something that they can do.
When you said 3 tight ends, you're referring to Kincaid, Mayer, and Darnell Washington, I assume?
Probably. Yeah. I had a team. I think Musgrave's better than Washington, but I was told by a team to plug Washington in at 1. I still think he's 1, 2, but apparently there's some teams at the back end that are kind of hot on Darnell Washington. So he's a guy to keep an eye on.
Interesting. Yes. Very big guy. Evan, anything else for Lance before we let him get
Kincaid, by the way, could slip completely out because he has not worked out. That's one thing to keep an eye on. Don't underestimate the
Michael
fact
Mayer might be the number 1 tight end.
Yes, and when a guy can't work out, I think Michael Mayer is going to be the first tight end.
All right. Well,
when a guy can't work out,
be the first tight end right now.
Yeah, when a guy can't work out during the draft process, even though to me, I don't need to see Dalton Kincaid work out, but I had a team comment that he looked really thin at his pro day, and they were questioning what his weight was at the pro day. They thought he looked like he was like 225 or 230, and so. He played at 241. So there's a chance that he was like that. You could see teams say, let's just wait on him, because teams are much more confident about waiting on players than fans are. That's just something I've noticed over the years.
For sure.
No, Lance, thanks so much, man. You were so generous with your time, and we need to let you go because this was just this is info packed though. Thanks so much.
Yes, appreciate it. Lance, let the people know where they can find you, where they can find your work.
Well, if you want to say nice things, it's at Lance Zierlein on Twitter. If you don't, just go ahead and catch that block. Well, usually I like muting, because then they don't get their block badge. They just get muted, and then I've basically ignored them for the rest of their lives. But if you come at me and you want to have a real discussion, man, I get into it with people all the time with real discussions and give my opinions. And as long as you come with some respect, man, I don't mind having disagreements. Everyone has their own opinion. But just don't come at me and the first thing you say is I'm an idiot or I have no credibility or putting a clown emoji out there. That's a good way for me not to interact with you. And then you can check all my scouting reports at NFL.com. If you hit draft, you can go to prospects, and that's the 2023 draft tracker. And I think by tomorrow, all of my draft prospects this year will be like 475. They'll all be live. All the scouting reports will be live.
When's your next mock coming out? We're waiting with bated breath for your next mock.
Mock 4 is going to be, I think, a day before the draft.
Okay.
And that's my final one.
We will be looking forward to it. Be sure you're following Lance. Really appreciate the time, man. I know it's a super, super busy week for you. All
right. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Sure. For Lance, for Evan, for producer Luke, I am Adam. Good luck, everybody.